Hello and welcome, students. Today we'll begin a new poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It is composed by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is the longest major poem by the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, written in 1797-98 and published in 1978 in the first edition of Lyrical Ballads. And along with other poems and lyrical ballads, it is often considered as a signal shift to modern poetry and the beginning of British Romantic literature. But before I introduce you to the poem, I would like to give you an introduction to the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an English poet, literary critic, philosopher, and theologian who, with his friend William Wordsworth, was a founder of the Romantic movement in England and a member of the Lake Poets. He also shared volumes and collaborated with Charles Lamb, Robert Southey, and Charles Lloyd. He wrote the poems The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan, as well as the major prose work Biographia Literaria. His critical work, especially on William Shakespeare, was highly influential, and he helped introduce German idealist philosophy to English-speaking culture. Coleridge coined many familiar words and phrases, including suspension of disbelief. He had a major influence on Ralph Waldo Emerson and American transcendentalism. Throughout his adult life, Coleridge had crippling bouts of anxiety and depression. It has been speculated that he had bipolar disorder, which had been defined during his lifetime. He was physically unhealthy, which may have stemmed from a bout of rheumatic fever and other childhood illnesses. He was treated for these conditions and which fostered a lifelong opium addiction. He was an addict of opium, and many of the people say that when he was under the spell of the opium, or he was under the addiction of opium, he wrote some fantastic poems. Coleridge was born on 21st October in 1772 in the town of Ottery St. Mary in Devon, England. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was the 10th and the last child of his parents. And after his father's death in 1782, he was sent to Christ's Hospital for schooling. He had an amazing memory and an eagerness to learn. However, he described his next 3 years of school as depressed, moping, friendless. And in 1791, he entered Jesus College, Cambridge, England. Because of bad habits, Coleridge joined the 15th Light Dragoons, a British cavalry unit, in December 1793. After his discharge in April 1794, he returned to Jesus College, but he left in December without completing a degree. The reason he left was because of his developing friendship with Robert Southey. Both young men were very interested in poetry and shared the same dislike for the neoclassic tradition a return to the Greek and Latin classics. Both were also radicals in politics. From their emotional and idealistic conversations, they developed a plan for Pantisocracy, a vision of ideal community to be founded in America. This plan never came to be, and on October 4th, 1795, Coleridge married Sarah Fricker, the sister of Southey's wife to be, and by that time, however, his friendship with Southey had already ended. So his poetic career was that years from 1795 to 1802 were for Coleridge period of fast poetic and intellectual growth. His first major poem, The Aeolian Harp, was published in 1796 in his Poems on Various Subjects. Its verse and theme contributed to the growth of English Romanticism, illustrating a blending of emotional expression and description with meditation. The most influential event in Coleridge's career was his friendship with William Wordsworth, 1700, who was born in 1770 and died in 1850, and his wife Dorothy from 1896 to 1810. This friendship brought a joint publication with Wordsworth of the Lyrical Ballads, a collection of 23 poems, in September 1798, and the volume contained 19 of Wordsworth's poems and 4 of Coleridge's. The most famous of these was The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Coleridge later described the division of labor between the two poets. Wordsworth's was to give the charm of novelty to things of every day by awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and directing it to the loveliness and the wonders of the world before us, while Coleridge's endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural or at least romantic. And a second enlarged edition of Coleridge's poem also appeared in 1798. It contained further lyrical and symbolic works such as This Lime Tree Bower, My Prison, and Fears in Solitude. At this time, Coleridge also wrote Kubla Khan, perhaps the most famous of his poems, and began the piece. Another poem, Christabel. After spending a year in Germany with the Wordsworths, Coleridge returned to England and settled in the Lake District. And for the next 12 years, Coleridge had a miserable life, and the climate made his many ailments worse. And for pain relief, he took laudanum, a type of opium drug, and he soon became an addict. Poor health and emotional stress affected his writing. However, in 1802, he did publish the last and the most moving of his poems, Dejection and Ode. After a 2-year stay in Malta, a group of islands in the Mediterranean, he separated from his wife in 1806. The only bright point in his life was his friendship with the Wordsworths. But by 1810, after his return to the Lake District, his friendship had lessened and Coleridge then moved to London. Coleridge spent his last 18 years of his life at Highgate near London, England, as a patient under the care of James Gilman, and he wrote several works which were to have tremendous influence on the future of English thought in many fields. And finally, Coleridge died in 1834, and he left bulky manuscript notes that scholars of the mid-18th century found, and they began editing. So this is for the introduction of the poet. And now, in my next session, I'll be doing the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner.